Hello, hi, good morning, and a very warm welcome to this final session on Shakespeare. As I've already told you in the chat as well, that today is going to be our final session, and in this session, I'll be trying to wrap up the entire course. So, we'll be discussing unit number 14 to unit number 20 in this particular lecture, right? Because this is the last lecture that we are having. So since there are number of units that I am planning to complete in this lecture, so this lecture is going to be a little longer than the usual one, might take 2 hours as well, right? So be prepared for that, and let us just start with the discussion. So this class is for the course code ENM 6212, which is on Shakespeare, and we have been discussing the plays and comedies, the tragedies and comedies written by Shakespeare, right? So we have discussed Midsummer Night Dream. We have discussed King Lear. We have started with the discussion of Tempest in the last lecture, right? And in this lecture, we'll finally end with Hamlet, which is a revenge tragedy written by Shakespeare, right? So let us discuss about the course structure. Midsummer Night Dream, we have already completed. It is a romantic comedy by Shakespeare, which makes use of illusion, fantasy, and the fairyland. Then there was King Lear. It was about the idea of not understanding that who is the right person to trust on, right? So it was based on literal and literary blindness. Then in Tempest, we have seen how there was usurping of the kingdom of Prospero by his own brother. So there was all themes of power, control, betrayal, and also colonization was also there in relation to Caliban and Prospero's relationship. Now, in this lecture, we'll be winding up with the Tempest, right? We'll be talking about the final two acts of the Tempest, and then we'll move forward with starting the revenge tragedy by Shakespeare, which is titled as Hamlet. So we'll talk about this particular thing as well in this lecture, right? So before starting, let us just discuss about the learning goals that we are having in relation to today's lecture. So when we are talking about the learning goals or the objectives that we are having in relation to today's lecture, so we'll be first analyzing the themes of forgiveness, reconciliation, and renunciation of power in the Tempest. So why these themes are important? Because forgiveness, reconciliation, and renunciation, these are all related with the idea of comedy, right? It is not related with the idea of tragedy. If there would have not been forgiveness or reconciliation in the end, then Tempest would have not been called a comedy. It would have turned into a tragedy if Prospero decided to take proper revenge, and and in that matter, he might have killed the people as well, right? So if there is bloodshed, there is destruction all over, and there is no reconciliation, so what will happen? It will end up into a tragedy. It will end up into the loss of the life of people. It will end up into bloodshed all over and destruction. And that is the main reason that these themes are prominent in Tempest. That is why it is a comedy and it has not turned into a tragedy. Otherwise, if Prospero had decided to take proper revenge instead of forgiving or reconciling with the brother, then it would have turned into a tragedy, right? So this is the thing that you have to remember, that the main ideas, the main themes that are getting represented in Tempest are the reason that it has not turned into a tragedy, right? So the main idea in tragedy is that of destruction, it's of death, it's of bloodshed, but that idea is getting restricted because Prospero is deciding to forgive and reconcile. And instead of taking revenge, he's finally deciding to forgive and reconcile. So we'll be analyzing these particular elements. Okay, so we'll analyze forgiveness, reconciliation, and renunciation. Then we'll interpret the significance of Prospero's mask and epilogue. We'll discuss that there is a mask that is getting performed and the epilogue that finally Prospero is giving, right? So one thing that you have to remember in relation to Tempest is that this particular play is considered to be Shakespeare's farewell to drama. So this was one of the last plays that he was writing to be performed, and that is why it is considered to be a sort of farewell that Shakespeare is giving to drama. So Prospero, when he is renunciating his powers, his magics that he has learned through books, it is actually symbolic of Shakespeare renunciating writing and leaving the field of literature. right? So basically, Prospero is symbolic of Shakespeare moving away from the entire literary canon. So it was Tempest is considered to be his farewell to writing, right? So that is why we can symbolize that Prospero is actually Shakespeare, and when he's giving an epilogue, he's also trying to make that audience understand about this idea that this is actually the farewell of the writer, that is the dramatist Shakespeare. So when Prospero is giving away the magical powers, right? So he's moving back to his kingdom. So this is actually symbolic of the act where Shakespeare gave up writing. Right? So it is symbolic of when Prospero is giving up magic, it is symbolic of Shakespeare giving away the writing. So this is something that you have to remember, that Tempest, it is considered to be Shakespeare's farewell to writing, or drama to be specific. So we'll evaluate the contrast between illusion and reality in act number 4 and 5. So since till now we have discussed a lot of comedies and tragedy by Shakespeare, so till now you must have understood that the idea of contrast between illusion and reality, even if we talk about Midsummer Night Dream, and when Bottom was waking up after the sleep, he was considering all that has happened with him as a dream. So there was basically an amalgamation of reality and illusion. There was no clarity that what was reality and what was illusion. So these kind of blurring of illusion and reality is very common in the writing of Shakespeare, which we see in the idea of Tempest as well. We are not able to understand which is actually the reality and which is only illusion. Like, for example, when the play is starting with a storm, so that storm is not natural. It has been orchestrated by using the magical powers. So it becomes illusion instead of reality. But we are considering it as reality because we do not know the reason behind it, right? So that is why Shakespeare is using a lot of themes where he's using this idea of blurring illusion and reality. Then we'll examine the role of Ariel and Caliban. Ariel and Caliban are both the servant who was working for Prospero. Caliban was actual higher of the island because his mother Sycorax, she was a witch and she was ruling that particular island before Prospero came to the island. So Caliban is actually the legitimate hire of that island, and that is why he's very much frustrated. He's very much angry with Prospero that he has taken away all his freedom and liberty. While Ariel is also a, person or servant working for Prospero, but he is not that resistant towards Prospero. He wants freedom as well, but he's very much obedient towards Prospero. Now we'll understand the structure of Shakespeare tragic resolution in Hamlet. We'll be understanding that in what manner Shakespeare is using tragic elements in Hamlet. Then we'll analyze theme of revenge, because Hamlet is considered to be one of the greatest revenge tragedy. So this idea of revenge tragedy has come from the greatest writer, which is known as Seneca, right? So he was writing plays which were dealing with this idea of revenge. So when Shakespeare was writing Hamlet, the idea of revenge tragedy has come from there. So this is also something that you can remember, that idea of revenge tragedy is coming from Seneca. So revenge tragedy as a term itself is suggesting it is a tragedy that is based upon the idea of avenging the death of a person. So in this particular tragedy, there is Hamlet. Prince Hamlet is there, and he's trying to avenge the death of his father, that is King Hamlet. So Prince Hamlet is our protagonist, and King Hamlet is the person who he is trying to avenge the death, right? So both are having the same name, but the prince is the protagonist and the king is the one who has been murdered. So this entire tragedy is based on this idea of revenge. Right, then we'll evaluate Hamlet's transformation from indecision to action. So we'll also be understanding that how Hamlet has transformed. Initially, he was showing a lot of indecisiveness. He was not able to take the decision. He was not able to understand whether his father has been murdered or it was a natural death, or, right? So he was not able to make a proper decision. This is the kind of character Hamlet was in the initial part of the play, but eventually he takes action. But what were the consequences of action, that we'll be talking about in this particular lecture. Now we'll interpret key scenes such as the graveyard scene and the final duel. Then we'll develop critical thinking through character analysis and thematic interpretation. So we'll try to develop our critical thinking in terms of understanding Shakespeare's comedies and tragedy. Why we are doing while we are doing the character analysis and thematic interpretation. What are the common themes that we get to see in these particular type of plays? Now, let us start with the act number 4 of Tempest. So we have done till the act number 3, which was the climatic act, right? So we have seen that how the king Oberon was asking the servant that you should basically reconcile the 4 lovers, and whatever the thing you have done wrong, you have to fix it, right? So he is asking that whatever you have done wrong, now it is time for you to fix it. Now we are moving towards act number 4. Okay, so we are discussing about Tempest. So in act number 3, what we get to see, in act number 3, there is basically a banquet that is happening, and the people who were there on the ship, they were sitting there, right? And what happened, Ariel is making use of his magic, and that banquet is getting disappeared, right? And after that, Ariel is appearing, and then he's confronting all those people for whatever the wrongdoings they have done with Prospero. So he was condemning, Ariel was condemning all those people who were there on the ship for wrongdoing, whatever wrong they have done with Prospero, the master of Ariel. So he was condemning all those people. And at that point of time, there was one person who was feeling guilty. That is the father of Ferdinand. And he was considering that my son has died because of the sins that I have done, because of the wrongdoings that I have done in relation to Prospero, right? But not all the people were feeling guilty at that particular point of time, but there were some people who started feeling repentance, and they were feeling guilty for the acts they have done, right? So this was the idea of the climatic act, where we can see a sort of turn is taking up. Initially, they were not understanding that they have done something wrong, but there, in act number 3, there is a sort of realization of the wrongdoings that they have done in the past and the consequences of that action as well. Now, act number 4 is about the act number 4 is centered on Prospero's control, celebration, and sudden reminder of danger. So Prospero formally acknowledged the union of Ferdinand and Miranda. So we see that initially in the act number 3, he was taking a sort of test, and he was asking Ferdinand to carry the logs to check that whether he's the right person for Miranda or not. But in act number 4, we see that he's finally acknowledging their relationship, and he's giving his consent for the relationship of Ferdinand and Miranda, giving his approval to their marriage. So he's giving approval to the marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda. However, he wants Ferdinand to respect Miranda's purity and not to break her virginity before the wedding. So he's also asking Ferdinand that you should respect the dignity of a woman, the dignity and purity of a woman, and you should not try to break her virginity, right? So you should not take away her virginity before you both are getting wedded. So this reflects the importance of chastity and moral discipline. So this idea where Prospero is emphasizing on virginity is actually symbolic of the Elizabeth age traditions of chastity. A woman has to be chaste and pure, right? So purity in that particular point of time was associated with chastity. So to celebrate their engagement, Prospero arranges a magical mask. So what is happening, in order to commemorate the engagement between Ferdinand and Miranda, Prospero is engaging a magical mask. So there is a performance, there is a magical performance. So just like we have seen in Midsummer Night Dream, or right, so we have seen the mask or the performance in Midsummer Night Dream as well. So now here we also see that there is a mask that is getting performed, and what is the purpose of that mask? It is to commemorate the wedding of the engagement of Ferdinand and Miranda. And when we are talking about Midsummer Night Dream, we also have seen there that at that point of time also there was basically a play that is getting performed to commemorate the marriage of the Duke and Hippolyta, right? So this is something which is symbolic in the writings of Shakespeare, right? So right. So, what was the reason for the mass? The reason for the mass to be performed is to commemorate the engagement between Ferdinand and Miranda. So, it is performed by spirits under his control. So, the mask is getting performed by the spirits which are under the control of Prospero because he's a magician. Now, goddesses like Iris, Ceres, and Juno, they are appearing and blessing the couple with prosperity, fertility, and harmony. Right. So, what are the goddesses that are appearing in the mask? Iris, Ceres, and Juno. So these three goddesses, they are appearing and they are blessing the couple with prosperity, fertility, and harmony. The mask symbolizes an ideal world order, love, and abundance. So mask is symbolic of an ideal world order. Everything has been reconciled. There has been proper balance. So it shows a sort of ideal world which is full of order, love, and abundance. Now, if we talk about the analysis of Act number 4, there is theme of control and power because Prospero's power is at peak at this particular point of time because whatever he has thought is turning out to be true. So he has planned everything and that planning has been implemented. So we can see that Prospero is at the highest level. He's having the highest authority and power right now. And then he's giving the consent for the marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda. Then there is a mass that is getting performed under his control. So the spirits are performing the mass which is under the control of Prospero. So we can see the power, we can see that how powerful Prospero is in this particular act. Right, so the mass demonstrate his ability to create beauty and harmony, yet this power is also fragile as seen when he is distracted by the conspiracy. So during the performance of the mass he get distracted, and why he get distracted? Because of the conspiracy that Caliban was having with Trinculo and Stefano, right? So we have discussed that how they were planning to observe Prospero, to kill Prospero and take away all the powers. So he's getting very much concerned about that conspiracy, and because of that, he's getting distracted from the mask that is getting performed. Now, mask is basically symbolic of illusion versus reality because the mask is getting performed under the control of Prospero. So it is not natural, it is under control. So mask is representative of ideal harmony, love, fertility, prosperity, the world of illusion and art, right? Because when a mask is getting performed, it is symbolic of an illusionary world as well as it is symbolic of art. So its sudden disappearance highlights the transience of life. So that sudden disappearance of the mask because Prospero is getting distracted and that is why his magic spell is broken. So that mask is getting disappeared. So this disappearing of the mask is also having a symbolic association with the transient nature of life. That just like that piece of art, human life is also very transient in nature. It can end at any particular point of time. So mask is also symbolic. Prospero was also making a very important statement that we are such stuff as dreams are made up of. So he was comparing human beings, the life of human beings, with dreams. What are dreams? Dreams are simply illusions. So he was comparing the life of human beings with illusionary things. That means that it is transient in nature, it is temporary in nature, and the life of human being can end at any particular point of time. Right? So this is what he was trying to portray. The idea that all human achievements are temporary. So this is right. So the transience of life and art is symbolic over here. The idea that all human achievements are temporary, because no matter what achievements we are having in our life, because of the transient and the temporary nature of life, it can end at any particular point of time. Right? So life is illusion. Prospero's speech is one of the most philosophical moments in the play. He is comparing life to a dream, which shows the fleeting nature of life. Human existence is temporary and insubstantial. Right? So existence of human being is temporary and also very much insignificant. This reflects a central theme of the play, which is the boundary between reality and illusion is uncertain. We cannot understand that where is the boundary that lies between reality and illusion. So theme of discipline and restraint are also there. Prospero's warning to Ferdinand to not to break the virginity of Miranda before they are getting wedded. The importance of self-control, moral discipline before marriage, that you have to be chaste before you are getting married. This reflects Renaissance value of order and virtues, right? So this is reflective of Renaissance ideas of morality, values, and virtues. Then there is a comic subplot that is of Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo, and how they were planning to observe the power of Prospero. So the subplot provides comic relief because they were having no power. They were just drunkard and they were just illusionary. They were just planning some random stuff, which is very comical in nature because they have no power and authority to do anything. So a contrast to the noble love of Ferdinand and Miranda, their foolishness, which is distracted by clothes, shows their lack of seriousness and moral weakness. The failure of rebellion against authority, right? So it is also symbolic of the failure of rebellion against the authority when you have no power. You cannot rebel against the authority. You cannot revolutionize against the authority if you do not have the power and authority. Now there is order and chaos. The mask represent order and harmony. The conspiracy is representative of chaos and disorder. Prospero's intervention restored balance. Conclusion, Act number 4 of Tempest highlights the themes of illusion versus power, transience versus control. So illusion versus power, that we are not able to understand which part of the play is actually real and which part is illusionary. Then the theme of power is there all over, that how Antonio has absorbed the kingdom of Milan from his brother Prospero, and then Prospero has absorbed the island from the witch Sycorax, and now Caliban was planning a conspiracy against Prospero to get power. So the theme of power is all over in the play. Then transience is in relation to art, that art is a reflection of life, right? So it is illusionary. But life is transient in nature because it can end at any point of time, and that is why it is very insignificant. Now, through the mask and Prospero's reflection, Shakespeare presents a profound meditation on the fleeting nature of life. So the main idea that is getting represented in the act number 4 is the fleeting nature of life. When Prospero is comparing life to dream, it shows that life is transient in nature, it is temporary in nature, and it can end at any point of time. And that is why all the achievement that human beings are making in their life is quite insignificant, because at the end you will die. So what is the point of doing all these things? So this is what he's trying to reflect in act number 4 of the Tempest. Now let us move to act number 5. So as we all know, as per the Freytag's pyramid structure, act number 5 is the conclusion of the plays written in the Elizabethan period. And since this is a romantic comedy, there will be no destruction and it will end in harmony and reconciliation. Now act number 5, it is the final resolution of the play, where conflicts are getting resolved and there is reconciliation and harmony is getting restored. The act begins with Prospero preparing to confront his enemies. What is happening in the starting of the act? The act is starting and Prospero is preparing to confront his enemy. Prospero is finally deciding that now it is time for me to confront the people who have done wrong with me. Ariel informs him that Alonso, Antonio, and the others are under his magical control and are suffering mentally. Now, what is happening? Ariel is informing that his enemies, Prospero's enemies, are under his control, under his magical spell. So he's informing that Alonso, the father of Ferdinand, Antonio, the brother of Prospero, and the others are under the magical control, and they are suffering mentally because of the magical control. Ariel's compassion for them moves Prospero, who decide to forgive rather than punish. So what is happening? The compassion that Ariel is showing towards these people is actually changing the heart of Prospero. And because of that compassion, he is deciding that instead of taking revenge, I should forgive them. Because there is no point of taking revenge. The life is very fleeting in nature. Power is also fleeting. It can move from one person to another. So what is the point of taking revenge? So this is marking a turning point in Prospero's character, where Prospero is deciding that instead of taking revenge, I should forgive them. So Prospero then renounces his magical powers. So after deciding that instead of taking revenge, he will be forgiving the enemies, he is renouncing his magical powers, because he was having magical powers solely to take revenge. So he has developed his magical power by reading all those books solely for the purpose of taking revenge. But now, when he has decided that there is no point of taking revenge, he is renunciating the powers, the magical powers, declaring that he will break his staff, the stick with which he used to do all the magic. So that staff is actually symbolic of pen. What it is symbolic of? Let me write it in the chat box for you. Right. The chat is disabled. Okay, right. So we were discussing that staff of Prospero is symbolic of the pen of Shakespeare. Right, so the staff that Prospero was having is actually symbolic of the pen with which Shakespeare was writing. So both the power for Shakespeare lies in his pen with which he is writing the plays, and for Prospero the power lies in the staff with which he is doing all the magical spell. So when he is breaking that staff, it is actually symbolic of renunciating the powers, and this breaking of the staff is also symbolic of breaking of the pen or giving up writing. Right, so this breaking of staff is symbolic of Shakespeare giving up writing, as Tempest is considered to be his farewell to stage. Right, so breaking of the staff is symbolic of Shakespeare giving away writing, as Tempest is considered to be his farewell to stage. Right, so Prospero is renouncing his magical powers by breaking the staff and drawn his book, the Book of Magical Powers. He is drawing it away. It's symbols of his authority. This signifies his return to human life. So renouncing of the magical power is signifying that he's finally moving back to the human life and the rejection of the supernatural control. He's renouncing all the supernatural powers and he's coming back to the human life. Now he reveals himself to Alonso and the others. Alonso repents for his past action, usurping Prospero's dukedom. So he is revealing his true nature among Alonso and Antonio, and Alonso is repenting whatever he has done in the past regarding the usurping of Prospero's dukedom, and he is also mourning the death of his son Ferdinand, believing him to be dead. So he is still believing. Alonso is still in illusion that Ferdinand has died. But Prospero forgives him and reassures him. In a joyful moment, Ferdinand and Miranda are discovered playing chess, alive and united. Their marriage symbolizes reconciliation between two families. The marriage between Ferdinand and Miranda is actually symbolizing the reconciliation between the two families. Now, Miranda, seeing other humans for the first time, expresses wonder at humanity because Miranda has been living away on an island filled with spirits. Right, so the only human that she has encountered earlier was Ferdinand and his father, and apart from that, she was not in touch with the humanity. But when she sees a lot of people who are humans, she gets very excited. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it. And she's making this statement, oh, brave new world. So, this entire world seems to be a new world for her because she has not seen many human beings in front of her at any point of time earlier. So, that has such people in it. So, she's realizing that this is the new world and these are the kind of humans that live in it. Now, Prospero also forgives his brother Antonio, though Antonio does not openly repent. Because Prospero himself has decided that instead of taking revenge, I will be forgiving everybody. So he is forgiving everyone, even his brother Antonio, though Antonio is not showing any sort of remorse and he is not openly repenting his action. The conflict is resolved and Prospero regains his dukedom. The conflict is getting resolved and Prospero is again regaining the dukedom of Milan. He is becoming the Duke of Milan. So meanwhile, Caliban, Stefano and Trinculo are brought in ashamed and defeated. Caliban realizes his mistake and promises to be wiser in future. Caliban is actually realizing his mistake that he has considered some drunkard to be god and powerful people, and he is realizing that he will not commit such foolish mistakes in the future. At the end, Ariel is set free, Ariel the spirit is finally set free, and Prospero prepares to return to Milan. The play concludes with Prospero's epilogue. This is very important. The conclusion of the play comes with Prospero's epilogue, where he asks the audience for applause, symbolically seeking release from the stage. So Prospero is coming in the end. He is asking the audience to applause, which is also symbolic of release from the stage. So here Prospero is representative of Shakespeare. He's coming in front of the audience and he's asking applause and he's basically bidding them a final farewell. Now, if we analyze the act number 5, there are themes of forgiveness and reconciliation. The dominant theme that we get to see in the act number 5 is that of forgiveness. So Prospero forgives Alonso and Antonio, right? So the compassion that Ariel was having towards these people, Antonio, Alonso, and the other person, because of that compassion, Prospero has decided that instead of taking revenge, it is better for me to basically forgive them. It will be better for my own mental peace as well that if I am forgiving them. So he's finally deciding to forgive the people. Right. So there's dominant theme of forgiveness. So we can see in act number act number 5, the final concluding act. What is the dominant theme? What is the main idea that is getting represented? The main idea, the dominant theme that we get to see here is that of forgiveness. Prospero forgives Alonso, Antonio, and the others. Conflict is resolved through mercy rather than revenge. So the conflict is getting resolved through mercy rather than taking revenge. So it is getting resolved through forgiveness and reconciliation instead of taking revenge and causing bloodshed and destruction. It is reflective of a moral movement from anger to compassion. So this idea of forgiveness is actually reflective of a moral moment. You are thinking morally, and your anger is getting converted from anger to compassion. Then there is renunciation of power. Finally, Prospero is renouncing the power. He's giving away his magical powers. So Prospero's decision to abandon magic, he is breaking away his staff, which is symbolic of Shakespeare giving away writing. So the staff is symbolic of the pen of Shakespeare, symbolizes letting go of control and revenge. So the renunciation of power is also symbolic of letting go of control and revenge. Right? So when he is renouncing the power, he is also giving up the idea of control and revenge. Suggest acceptance of human limitations. So renouncing of power is also symbolic of the limitations that human beings are having. So, often interpreted as William Shakespeare's farewell to stage. Right? So, the renunciation of power is also symbolic of Shakespeare's farewell to stage. Ariel and Caliban, these are the two contrasting figures because Ariel represents freedom, spirit, and loyalty towards Prospero, while Caliban represents base instinct and rebellion. Ariel gains freedom while Caliban gains self-awareness. So in the concluding part, Ariel is getting free and Caliban is realizing that what wrong he has done and he needs to be more wise. Miranda's innocence and vision. Miranda is the most innocent character in the entire play. So she is making this famous line, "Oh brave new world." So she is talking about "Oh brave new world" in relation to the human being that she is encountering for the very first time. It reflects innocence as well as optimism, contrast with the audience awareness of human flaws. But this idea of the brave new world filled with human, which is very fascinating for Miranda, is actually contrasting with audience awareness of human flaws. That though Miranda might find these humans as fascinating, but we know that humans have so many flaws in them, right? So this is the main contrasting idea because she has lived away from humanity, so she does not know that what kind of flaws human beings are having. She has only encountered two human beings who have been very good with her, that is his father and Ferdinand. So she is not aware with the cruelty and the flaws that human beings are having, and that is why she is the most innocent character that Shakespeare has portrayed in the entire play. So the play ends with Prospero restored to the Duke of Milan, Ferdinand and Miranda's union, social and political harmony reestablished. So what is the final ending? Prospero is again becoming the Duke of Milan. Ferdinand and Miranda, they are getting engaged. Social and political harmony is getting reestablished. This reflects structure of Shakespeare comedy. The entire ending is reflective of Shakespeare comedy, where there is disorder followed by resolution. So earlier there was chaos. Now finally, so comedy starts with chaos and disorder and it ends with resolution. Now there is illusion versus reality. The magical illusions dissolve. Truth is revealed. Reality replaces enchantment. This reinforces the idea that illusion is temporary, but reality must ultimately prevail. Illusion is for a short period of time, but eventually reality and truth will prevail. Now, it breaks the boundary between play and audience because Prospero in the epilogue is coming on the stage and he's asking the audience for an applause and also bidding farewell. So basically, he's again breaking the fourth wall. Seeks release through applause, highlights the theme of theater and illusion. Right? So it is also highlighting that theater is also a sort of illusion because it is not something which is real. Conclusion. So just like we have dreams which are illusionary in nature, theater is also reflective of that illusion. Now act number 5 of Tempest brings the play to a harmonious conclusion. uh, Prospero is becoming the duke. Both the lovers Ferdinand and Miranda, they are getting reunited. Ariel is getting freed. Caliban is getting self-awareness. So there is harmony all over by emphasizing forgiveness, reconciliation, and the renunciation of power. Through Prospero's transformation, William Shakespeare presents a profound message that humanity, true strength lies not in control or revenge, but in mercy, acceptance, and letting go. So, through the character of Prospero, what is Shakespeare trying to make us understand? That the true nature, the true strength of control lies not in taking revenge, but in mercy, in forgiveness and acceptance, and letting go of things. This is the true essence of being a human. Now this was it for the Tempest. We have concluded with the entire romantic comedy by Shakespeare. And what we'll be doing now? We'll start with the revenge tragedy that is written by Shakespeare. Right? Just a moment, and we'll be starting with the revenge tragedy. So as I've already told you, that revenge tragedy, it is a type of tragedy which is based on the idea of taking revenge, and it has been model on the writings of Seneca. So there is. So, as I've told you, that the idea of revenge tragedy has been taken up from Seneca. So, he has written a lot of revenge tragedies, including Thyestes, a cannibalistic revenge feast, Medea, or a sorceress murdering for her children for vengeance, and Phaedra, a false accusation leading to death. These works heavily influenced Elizabethan revenge tragedy, and Hamlet is also one of those tragedies which is getting influenced by these revenge tragedies written by the famous writer Seneca. Right, so let us start with the revenge tragedy. At number one, scene number one. So the protagonist is Prince Hamlet, and the person who has been murdered is King Hamlet. Now, in scene number one, what we get to see on a cold night at Elsinore. Elsinore is the setting of the play, the castle of Elsinore. Ferdinand, right? So, the play is taking place at Elsinore Castle, and Bernardo, Francisco are joined by Marcellus and Horatio. Ferdinand and Francisco, they are the servants or the guards at the Elsinore Castle, and Marcellus and Horatio are the friends of uh, sorry, Bernardo, Francisco, and Marcellus. These three are the guards, and Horatio is the friend of Prince Hamlet. So they are discussing the appearance of a ghost resembling the dead King Hamlet. So what is happening at one cold night at the Elsinore Castle when Bernardo, Francisco, and Marcellus, these are the three people that were there at that point of time. So they encounter a ghost, and they were discussing that the ghost was resembling the dead king Hamlet. So the ghost appears but does not speak. So the ghost is appearing but he is not speaking anything. Horatio interrupts it as a bad omen for Denmark. Horatio, the friend of Hamlet, he is interpreting that idea, the appearance of ghost, as a bad omen, right? As something very bad for the state of Denmark, possibly linked to political tension with Norway. And he is saying that this might be linked to the political tension that Denmark is having with Norway. The scene establishes an atmosphere of fear, uncertainty, and impending crisis. So the scene is establishing an atmosphere of fear because there is an appearance of ghost, uncertainty, and impending crisis. That there it is actually foreshadowing the crisis that will happen in the future. Now, scene number two. So Bernardo, Francisco, and Marcellus, these are the three guards that were there at that point of time, and they encounter a ghost. But they called Horatio so that he can become a witness to all these things that are happening. Now, in scene number two, King Claudius, who is King Claudius? Because the earlier king of Denmark, that is King Hamlet, he has been murdered. Now, King Claudius, the brother of King Hamlet, has become the king. So, usually the idea is that the son of the king will become the king. But here, what is happening? The brother has taken up the throne. So King Claudius is addressing the court, balancing mourning for his brother with celebration of his marriage to Queen Gertrude. Now in scene number two, we are also understanding that not just he has taken up the kingdom, but he has also married the widowed wife of his brother, that is Queen Gertrude. So who is Queen Gertrude? She is the mother of Prince Hamlet and also the wife of the deceased or murdered king of Denmark, that is King Hamlet. So, what is happening in scene number 2? We are uh, seeing that Claudius has taken up the kingdom and he is also married. So, instead of mourning, instead of crying over the loss of his brother, he has taken up control of the kingdom and he has also married his uh, widowed wife. So, this is something that we are getting to know in the scene number 2. Right, so he sends envoys to Norway to control Fortinbras. So in the initial scene we get to see that there is an ongoing tension between Denmark and Norway, and to manage that tension he is sending an envoy to Norway to control Fortinbras. Right, so Fortinbras is the ruler of Norway. Hamlet expresses deep grief and disgust at his mother's quick remarriage. Hamlet is in grief. He's mourning the death of his father, and he's also very disgusted with the idea that his mother has taken a very quick decision of remarrying. So his first soliloquy reveals his melancholy and delusionment. Horatio informs him of the ghost and Hamlet resolves to see it. Right, so what is happening? He is completely disgusted with the idea of his mother getting married to his uncle, and that too in such a short span of time. Right, so he is not able to process all these things because at one point of time his father has died, at another point of time the mother is also getting remarried. So there is lot of things that he had to process. Right, so the first soliloquy that Hamlet is making is in act number 1, scene number 2, where he's saying, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt." So, what he's saying, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt." So, he's actually thinking about this idea of dying, of committing suicide. So this entire soliloquy is dependent on that idea. So because he was completely mourning the idea and he was also disgusted with what his mother has done, he was feeling like killing himself. So his first soliloquy reveals his melancholy and the delusionment with the world. Horatio is informing that there is an appearance of the ghost, and Hamlet is taking the decision that I should meet that ghost. Now, in scene number 3, Latres prepares to leave for France and advises Ophelia to trust Hamlet's love, calling it temporary. So, what is happening? Latres is the brother of Ophelia. Ophelia is the love interest of Hamlet. So, when Latres is preparing to leave France, when Latres is preparing to leave for France, so he is leaving Denmark. Latres is leaving Denmark and he is moving to France. He is advising his sister Ophelia that you should not trust Hamlet's love because it is temporary in nature. So he is basically warning her to stay away from Hamlet. Polonius is the father of Ophelia and Latres. Polonius reinforces this warning. So both whatever Latres has suggested Ophelia, that warning is getting reinforced by his father Polonius, and he is also saying it that you should stay away from Hamlet. Instructing Ophelia to avoid Hamlet, this scene highlights themes of control, obedience, and distrust of love, especially regarding women's autonomy. So this scene is also reflective of power and control that the men were having on the lives of women. They wanted to control every aspect of the life of women, whom they are meeting, whom they are trusting, with whom they are falling in love, with whom they are getting married, where they are going, at what point of time they are going. So basically, this shows the complete patriarchal society where men wanted to control every moment that the women are making, and that is why they are instructing her that you should stay away from Hamlet. Right, so she is not having any choice of her own. She cannot make her own decision. They are imposing their own decision on Ophelia that you should stay away from Hamlet. Now, scene number 4, Hamlet joins Horatio and Marcellus on the battlements. So what is happening in the earlier scene? We have seen in scene number 2 that Hamlet is deciding that he will meet the host. So he's joining Horatio and Marcellus on the battlements. the ghost where the ghost has appeared earlier. The ghost reappears, and despite warning, Hamlet follows it. Right. So there is an appearance of the ghost, and in spite of the warnings that Marcellus and Horatio were giving to Hamlet, he was following the ghost. He criticizes the Danish custom of drinking, linking it to national weakness. The scene builds tension and shows Hamlet's determination and courage. So when Hamlet is going after the ghost, this shows that he is determined and courageous. Now, scene number 5, the ghost reveals that Claudius murdered him by poisoning him in his sleep. So, what is happening in scene number 5? There is a revelation, there is a truth that the ghost is telling to the Prince Hamlet. He is saying that Claudius, my brother, has murdered me by poisoning me in my ear while I was asleep. He demands revenge but asks Hamlet to spare Gertrude. So he is saying that you should avenge my death, but he's also asking that you should spare Gertrude. Hamlet is horrified and swears to remember the ghost's command. He tells his friend he will act mad, introducing the theme of appearance versus reality. Right. So once he gets to know that Claudius has killed his father, right, by poisoning, he is taking decision of taking revenge from him. And in order to implement that idea, what is he doing? He is saying that I will pretend myself to be mad so that I can implement my plan. So he's telling his friend that I will act mad, which is introducing the theme of appearance versus reality in this particular play as well. Now, Act 1 establishes the tragic conflict and atmosphere of mystery and corruption. Whatever the ghost is saying, it is ambiguous. Why it is ambiguous? Because we cannot understand whether this ghost is real, whether this ghost is actually a genuine ghost, or it is just an evil spirit which is trying to cause destruction and bloodshed in the kingdom of Denmark. So this is the idea of ambiguity that is getting established with the appearance of the ghost. So the ghost introduces ambiguity. So there is ambiguity, there is complexity, there is confusion with the appearance of ghost. Whether it is a spirit of truth or a devil tempting Hamlet, right? So why there is an ambiguity or complexity? Because we are not able to understand whether this spirit is of truth or of a devil who's trying to tempt Hamlet. The theme of revenge tragedy is set in the motion, but Hamlet's reflective nature complicates it. So Hamlet is very reflective in nature. Before taking any action, he thinks a lot. He thinks over it again and again. He thinks that if the whatever the ghost is saying is not true, and if I act, I might kill innocent people. So he's reflecting. He's too much contemplating on that idea, and because of it, it becomes very complicated. His disgust at Gertrude's remarriage reveals concern with morality, sexuality, and betrayal. So when he's showing discontent with her mother's marriage to Claudius, the idea of Oedipus complex is also shown here, because see, there is concern of sexuality, right? So he's not just disgusted because his mother has married his uncle, but he's also disgusted that why his mother has not chosen him over the uncle. So there is this idea of Oedipal complex. What is Oedipal complex? Is when the child has attraction towards the parent of opposite sex and envies the parent of same sex. Right? So Oedipus complex is when the child has attraction towards the parent of opposite sex and envies the parent of same sex. Right? So this is the idea that is also getting represented over here. The state of Denmark is described as rotten, symbolizing political and moral decay. There is a famous statement that Marcellus, one of the servants, was making. There is something rotten in the state of Denmark. Rotten is actually symbolic of political as well as moral decay. Politically, there was unrest because Denmark and Norway were having political tension. There is also moral decay because the king has been murdered. So there is both political as well as moral decay, which is symbolic of the rotten character. Now, act number 2, in scene number 1, what is happening? Polonius, who's Polonius? Polonius is the father of Ophelia and Laertes. Polonius is sending Rinaldo, right? So Polonius is sending Rinaldo to spy on Laertes in France because Laertes has gone to France. So he's sending Rinaldo to spy over his son, showing his manipulative nature, which shows that he's very manipulative and controlling in nature. Ophelia reports Hamlet's strange, disturbed behavior. He appeared disheveled and silent. Polonius concludes that Hamlet is mad with love for Ophelia. Now, in scene number 1, what are the things that we are seeing? First thing is that Polonius is sending a spy to spy over his son, which shows the manipulative nature that he is having. Apart from that, Ophelia is telling Polonius that Hamlet has been behaving in a very strange manner. There is something wrong with Hamlet, and Polonius is understanding that he's acting strange. He has turned mad because his love has been rejected by Ophelia. So this is the conclusion that Polonius is making. But the truth was not that. He was just acting mad so that he can implement his revenge plan. Right? So he was just pretending to be mad. But Ophelia was very much concerned that why is he acting in this manner? What is the reason behind his strange behavior? She's not able to understand the reason behind the strange behavior of Hamlet. So she was very confused, perplexed, as well as worried because the father is considering she's not uh, talking to Hamlet, and that is why Hamlet might be feeling dejected in love, which is the reason of his madness. But it is not true because Ophelia was in contact with Hamlet, but he was acting weird. So in scene number 2, Claudius and Gertrude invites Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. These are the two childhood friend of Hamlet, and Claudius and Gertrude, they are inviting Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Why they are inviting him, both of them? So that they can spy on Hamlet, because Hamlet has been acting very strangely, very weirdly. So that is why Claudius and Gertrude, they are thinking that we should appoint the friend of Hamlet to spy on him so that we can understand the reason for his madness and what are the things that he's planning in his mind. Polonius presents his theory of love madness. So when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are called upon to spy on Hamlet, Polonius is giving his own theory of the strange behavior that Hamlet is showing. He's saying that he has turned mad because he has been dejected in love, because Ophelia has rejected his proposal, and that is why he has turned mad. This is the theory, the love theory that Polonius is presenting in front of Claudius and Gertrude. Hamlet mocks Polonius cleverly, suggesting his madness may be strategic. Now, when he is giving this idea, the theory of love madness, Hamlet is mocking Polonius. Right? He's basically humorously mocking him, and he's cleverly suggesting that his madness may be strategic. What if whatever I'm doing is strategic? What if whatever I'm doing is planned? What if whatever I'm doing is illusionary? So the arrival of the players inspired Hamlet to plan the mousetrap. Arrival of the players. Who are the players? The players are the actors who will be playing a play within the play. So in this revenge tragedy also we get to see a play within the play, which is the mousetrap. So mousetrap, what is a mousetrap? Mousetrap is basically a kind of tool that we are using in order to trap a mouse. So in the similar manner, what is Hamlet planning? He is planning for the performance of a play in which he will show the killing and the murder of his father in the similar way as the ghost has told him that this was the manner in which I was killed by pouring poison in my ear. So what is he thinking? That I will get a play performed where I will be enacting the exact thing that have happened during the murder of my father, and then I will look on the reaction of Claudius. If his reaction will be suspicious, then I can clearly conclude that Claudius is guilty of murdering my father. So basically, he was using this idea of play within the play as a mousetrap. And what was the title of the play? What that was getting performed? The Murder of Gonzago. Right? So the play within the play that is getting performed in Hamlet, what it is titled? It is titled as The Murder of Gonzago. Right? So it is a mousetrap. It is basically a tool that Hamlet is using in order to trap Claudius. What is the play within the play called as? The Murder of Gonzago. Who is Gonzago? Gonzago is none other than the father of Prince Hamlet, King Hamlet. Right? So the arrival of players, the actors who will be performing the play within the play, which is titled as The Murder of Gonzago, a play to expose Claudius' guilt. And why the play is getting performed? In order to expose the guilt of Claudius of killing his own brother. His soliloquy criticizes his own delay, revealing self-doubt and frustration. There is another soliloquy that Hamlet is making, which is reflective of his actions. He is criticizing that why is he not able to take proper action? Why is he delaying his actions? Now, this act develops the theme of appearance versus reality. Everyone is spying and pretending. Ronaldo is spying on Latres, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are spying on Hamlet. So there is spying all over. Everyone is spying and pretending. Polonius, Claudius, and even Hamlet. Hamlet's madness is strategic. It is not because of the love theory that Polonius was giving. It is strategic in nature, which is allowing him to speak truths indirectly. Right? So he's feigning madness. He's pretending to be mad because he can speak truth indirectly. His soliloquy on the actor's emotional performance highlights his frustration with his own inaction. So the soliloquy on the actor's emotional performance is highlighting his frustration with his own inaction. The idea of theater as a mirror of truth becomes central. So use of theater, the play within the play, as a tool to reflect the truth and reality, it is central to the act. Right? So here, theater is becoming a mirror of truth, becomes central, showing how art can reveal hidden realities. So the idea of using play within the play in order to reveal the truth behind the murder of his father is actually reflective of how we can use art to reveal the hidden realities. Now there is act number 3. So Claudius and Polonius, they are spying on Hamlet, right? So what they are doing, Claudius and Polonius, they are spying on Hamlet's interaction with Ophelia. And why they are spying on Hamlet's interaction with Ophelia? Because Polonius has earlier given a theory that Hamlet has turned mad because Ophelia has rejected his proposal. So, in order to check whether this theory is true or not, what they are doing, Claudius and Polonius, they are spying when Hamlet and Ophelia are meeting. Hamlet delivers the to be or not to be soliloquy. This is the most famous soliloquy that is delivering in act number 3. It is considered to be the greatest soliloquies ever written. Now let us discuss this soliloquy in greater depth. right? So this is a soliloquy which Hamlet is speaking in act number 3, scene number 1, where he is contemplating life, death, suicide, and the fear of the unknown. Right? To be or not to be, that is the question. So, this is the soliloquy that he's speaking in act number 3, scene number 1, where he's contemplating on life, death, suicide, and the fear of unknown. Hamlet weighs the pain of existence against the uncertainty of the afterlife, right? So he's asking to be or not to be, to live or not to live, and then he's questioning that why we have to suffer so much pain if we have to die at one point of time. Now but he's thinking that what if after dying there is another world where we have to face different kind of suffering. So that is the whole idea of life and death that he was contemplating on. Hamlet weighs the pain of existence against the uncertainty that he might have to face after death, concluding that overthinking causes people to endure hardship. And finally, he's concluding that if we are overthinking, if we are contemplating too much, this overthinking causes people to endure hardships and pain in their life. Now, there is scene number 2. What is happening in scene number 2? Hamlet instructs the actors on proper acting, emphasizing realism. So when the play within the play, which is titled as The Murder of Gonzago, it is getting performed, he's instructing all the participants, he's instructing all the actors that when you are acting, your acting should look very real. Your acting should feel as if you are not performing. It should feel as if the entire thing is actually taking place, right? So he wanted to introduce the element of realism. Everything should look very real and so that people can relate to it. So during the performance of the Mousetrap, Claudius reacts strongly to the reenactment. So what happens when the play within the play titled Murder of Gonzago, it is getting performed, Claudius is reacting strongly. He's reacting to the reenactment of the murder and leaves abruptly. So when the play within the play is getting performed, what is happening? Claudius is acting weird and he is leaving the play mid. So he's not even seeing the play till the end. He's leaving in mid, abruptly leaving the play. So this shows that there is something wrong with Claudius. It shows that he's feeling guilty of his doings. This shows that he's actually the culprit who has murdered his brother in order to have power and control on the throne of Denmark. So during the performance of the Mousetrap, Claudius is reacting in a very strong manner. He is and on what point of time he was reacting? When there was reenactment of the murder, and after seeing that reenactment, he is leaving abruptly, which is confirming that he is guilty of killing his brother. Hamlet is now certain of the truth. So when he is leaving abruptly, Hamlet is now finally certain of the truth. This shows that how art is becoming the tool to uncover the hidden truth of reality. Now, scene number 3 of Act 3. Claudius attempts to pray but cannot sincerely repent. Now, after seeing the act, he is feeling guilty. Claudius is feeling guilty because all the sins that he has done in the past, they are getting reenacted. And when he's seeing those things getting reenacted, when he's seeing those things in front of his own eyes, he's able to contemplate. He's able to think about whatever he has done. And he's realizing that he is guilty. He has done some wrong things. And because of that guilt, what is he doing? He is deciding to repent. And for repentance, what is he doing? He is going to his chamber and he is praying to God because he wanted to repent on his sins. Now, Hamlet is going behind him and he sees that Claudius is praying. This was the time when he might have killed Claudius, but his moral conscience didn't allow him. Why the conscience didn't allow him? Because the person was praying at that point of time and he was thinking that right now if I kill him, he might go to heaven because he is praying, he is repenting his sins. And I would not let that happen. I would never want Claudius to be in heaven after whatever he has done with my father. And that is why when he was praying, Hamlet is deciding not to kill him at that particular point of time, because he might go to heaven because he is praying right now. So scene number 3, Claudius attempts to pray, but he cannot sincerely repent. Hamlet finds him alone, but decides not to kill him, fearing it would send Claudius' soul to heaven. Right? So this is something I have already told you, that he is finding Claudius alone in his chamber. This was a very good moment where he could have easily killed Claudius, but he was having this fear that what if he might go to heaven, his soul might reach to heaven. This moment highlights Hamlet's moral reasoning but continued delay. This moment is reflective of the moral nature, the moral consciousness that Hamlet was having, but it is also reflective of the continued delay. It is also reflective of the continuous inaction in his uh, plans. So this shows that he has been delaying his action for a very long period of time for multiple reasons. But right now there is a moral reason, but earlier also he has been delaying his action for a long period of time. So whenever there is a tragedy, there is a tragic character. So the tragic character in the play is Prince Hamlet, right? And that tragic character is having a tragic flaw. The flaw because of which there is the downfall of that character. So in relation to Hamlet's character, what do you think is his tragic flaw? The tragic flaw that Hamlet is having is actually his indecisiveness, his inaction. He is not able to take action. That is the main flaw that Hamlet is having. If he would have acted on the right point of time, if he would have acted actively, then these things might not have reached to this level, right? So the entire tragic flaw that Hamlet is having is his indecisiveness. He is not able to decide that what he has to do and in how in what manner he has to do, and he is also delaying his action. So earlier he was not sure that whether the ghost, whatever the ghost is saying, is true or not, right? Then when he gets sure after the play, within the play, he gets sure that whatever the host was saying was actually true and Claudius is actually guilty. Now he's also not able to act. Now finally he is making he has made a decision that Claudius is guilty. But even after making that decision, he's not acting. Right? So both indecisiveness as well as inaction is the major tragic flaw that we get to see in the character of Hamlet, which leads to his tragic downfall, which leads to the tragic ending of the play. So even after knowing the truth, he is not able to take action. That is the tragic flaw. So in Gertrude's chamber, Hamlet confronts her harshly about her actions. Now Hamlet is moving to Gertrude's chamber and he is confronting his mother and he is speaking harshly with her. Hearing a noise behind the curtain, he kills Polonius. So when he was talking with his mother, there was a person who was hiding behind the curtain, eavesdropping. So the person was trying to listen to the conversation that Hamlet was having with his mother. And basically, when Hamlet gets to know that there is a person hiding behind the curtain, he is assuming that person to be Claudius. And what is happening? He is killing that person without even knowing his true identity. Now, here earlier he was not taking any action, but now when he is taking action without even thinking. So he is taking completely irrational decisions. So this is another tragic flaw in his character, that earlier he was delaying his actions, but now when he has acted in the wrong manner. So hearing a noise behind the curtain, he is killing Polonius, who was hiding behind the curtain, thinking it was Claudius. So he has misinterpreted that the person standing behind the curtain was Claudius, but it was actually Polonius, the father of Ophelia and Laertes. So what is happening? He is unknowingly killing the father of Ophelia and Laertes. The ghost reappears, reminding Hamlet of his mission. Now after that, the ghost is again reappearing, and he's reminding that you have to take revenge. What are you doing? Why are you not acting? It has been such a long time. Now you are also aware about the truth, but still you are not acting. Gertrude cannot see the ghost, suggesting Hamlet's isolation. The scene marks a shift towards violence and irreversible consequences. So when there is reappearance of the ghost in scene number in act number 3, we get to see that Gertrude is not able to see the ghost. Only Hamlet is able to see the ghost. And when Gertrude sees Hamlet conversing with the ghost, she considers that Hamlet is completely in isolation, and that is why he is in delusion. So the scene marks a shift towards violence and irreversible consequences. So because from this particular scene we get to see the bloodshed has started with the killing of Polonius, so we can see that there has been a shift towards violence and irreversible consequences. Now act number 4, scene 1, Gertrude is informing Claudius of Polonius' death. What is happening? We have seen that Hamlet has unknowingly killed Polonius because he was assuming that it is Claudius. Now, Gertrude is informing Claudius that Polonius has died. Claudius fears for his own safety and decides to send Hamlet to England. After hearing about the death of Polonius in the hand of Hamlet, Claudius is very fearful that Hamlet might also kill him, and that is why he is deciding to send him to England. So Hamlet hides Polonius' body and speaks in riddles, frustrating Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So Hamlet is hiding the body of Polonius, and he's using riddles while he's communicating to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they were trying to ask Hamlet about the position or the location of the dead body of Polonius. But he was using riddles in order to avoid answering that question. Now there is scene number 3. So Claudius sends Hamlet to England with secret orders for execution. Earlier he was saying that I am sending Hamlet to England so that he can be a bit comfortable there, or basically he can be in a different environment where he can get chance to uh, overcome his grief and mourning. But his eventual plan was not just to send him to England. It was to send him to England with an execution order. He wanted to get Hamlet killed. So Hamlet responds with dark humor, showing awareness of deception. But Hamlet was aware of this planning that Claudius has made towards him, and he is responding with dark humor, showing how that he is aware of the deception and betrayal that Claudius is trying to do. Now, scene number 4, Hamlet encounters Fortinbras, right? Fortinbras, he is the ruler of Norway. So he is encountering Fortinbras' army and reflects on their willingness to fight for honor. In scene number 4, he is meeting the commander of Fortinbras' army, and he is seeing that how they are willing to fight for their honor. Now, after seeing that person from the army of Fortinbras, he is reflecting on his own indecisiveness, on his own inaction. He is comparing both of them. That Fortinbras is taking action even where there is a matter of honor, but I am not able to take action even for taking revenge for my father's murder. So he's basically comparing his inaction with the action that Fortinbras is making, right? So there is the contrasting figure that we get to see. Fortinbras is presented as somebody who actively takes action, while Hamlet is in complete contrast to him because he's not able to take action, and he's delaying the revenge. He's delaying the revenge where he wants to avenge the murder of his father, and he's completely delaying it, resolving to act more decisively. So he criticizes himself for delaying the action, for delaying the revenge, resolving to act more decisively. Now, and after that, he is also taking a decision that it is time for me to act more decisively. I need to take action, I need to take decisions. Now, in scene number 5, what is happening? Ophelia appears mad. After the killing of his father, at the hand of his lover, Ophelia has turned mad, singing fragmented songs about love and loss. So she is completely in dejection. Hamlet has been acting madly, and now he has also killed his father. So Ophelia is completely devastated. She has turned into madness. She keeps on singing fragmented song about love and loss. Her condition is reflective of the emotional trauma. It is reflective of the emotional trauma, the pain that she was going through. Latris, the brother who has gone to England, who has gone to France, is finally returning. So Latris, the brother of Ophelia and the son of Polonius, is coming back after hearing about the death of his father. He is furious over his father's death. Claudius calms him and manipulates him into seeking revenge against Hamlet. Now, what is happening when Latris is returning? He is very frustrated, he is very angry about the death of his father. Claudius is trying to calm him down, and he's also basically conspiring against the killing of Hamlet. So he's actually manipulating Latris that Hamlet is the reason. He is the one who has killed your father, and you should avenge the death of your father by dueling with him. So you should call him for a duel where you can kill him and take revenge of your father's death. Right? So Latris returns. He is furious over his father's death. Claudius tries to calm him up and manipulates him into seeking revenge against Hamlet by calling for a duel with Hamlet. Now, scene number 6, Horatio, the friend of Hamlet, he receives a letter from Hamlet explaining his escape from the ship to England after discovering Claudius' plot. So, Horatio is receiving a letter from Hamlet which shows that he has escaped the ship to England because he has already understood the plan of Claudius that he is sending him to England to be executed. So he got to know about the cruel and evil plot that Claudius was having. And that is why what is he doing? He is escaping the ship and he's not going to England. And this is the thing that he's sharing with his friend Horatio via writing a letter to him. Now in scene number 7, Claudius and Latris, they are planning Hamlet's death using a poisoned sword and wine. So earlier we get to see that Claudius was manipulating Latris that you should avenge the death of your father, and you can avenge it by calling Hamlet for a duel. And when you both will be having a duel, we will make use of a poisoned sword. I will give you a poisoned sword. So whenever you will strike Hamlet, that poison will go into his body and he'll die. And even if you are not able to uh, strike a wound on Hamlet, then we will be using a poisoned wine as well. So that there is a backup plan that we are having in order to kill Hamlet. So either we'll use the poisoned sword, or if that sword won't work, we'll use the poisoned wine. Now Gertrude reports Ophelia's drowning, described poetically intensifying the tragic mood. Now, what is happening when Claudius and Latris are planning the death of Hamlet by making use of poison, sword, and wine? Gertrude is entering and she is reporting that Claudia has that Ophelia has died out of drowning, and the drowning is described very poetically, intensifying the entire tragic mood. Now, if we talk about the analysis of act number 3, so act number 3, it is the climatic act, it is the turning point. Hamlet gains certainty about Claudius' guilt because there was a play within the play titled Murder of Gonzago that was getting performed. And what is happening? Claudius is leaving abruptly after seeing the reenactment of murder, which confirms that he is guilty. Right? So Hamlet gains certainty about Claudius' guilt, yet he continues to delay his action. The to be or not to be soliloquy explores existential question whether it is better to live or die. Hamlet's refusal to kill Claudius while he was praying also shows his moral and philosophical complexity. but also prolongs the tragedy. Right? It also shows his complexity in terms of philosophy, but this is also prolonging the tragedy. The killing of Polonius marks Hamlet's shift from contemplation to rash action. So finally, when he kills Polonius unknowingly, considering it to be Claudius, this shows that there has been a shift from contemplation, where he was thinking a lot, to rash action. Earlier, he was thinking a lot, he was having overthinking, but now he's not at all thinking, he's just acting. So, which is leading to further chaos. Now, act number 4 is emphasizing revenge and the consequences. Hamlet is delaying his action of taking revenge. Latrus is acting immediately. So, he is acting immediately. He is coming back from France. He is furious. He wants to take revenge. He is calling Hamlet for a duel. He is planning for killing of Hamlet with Claudius by making use of the poisoned sword and wine. So, Latrus is acting very immediately to avenge the death of his father. Latrus becomes a foil to Hamlet. So, what is a foil? Foil is basically a character who's completely in contrast to the other character. So, Latrus here becomes the foil because he's completely in contrast with Hamlet. Both of Latrus and Hamlet have lost their fathers. Both fathers have been murdered, but Hamlet is still not able to take any action. While on the other hand, Latrus is very immediate in taking action. Representing impulsive action, Ophelia's madness symbolizes the emotional and psychological damage caused by corruption and loss. So, Ophelia's madness and the madness that Ophelia was having, and finally her droning, is actually symbolic of the emotional and psychological effect of damage and loss. The political situation deteriorates further, reinforcing the theme of decay and disorder. So, after the drowning of Ophelia, the political situation is deteriorating. There is the political upheaval with the Norway as well. This further reinforced theme of decay and disorder in the play. Now, act number 5, scene number 1. Act number 5 is the final resolutionary act. So, gravediggers humorously discuss death, introducing a philosophical tone. So, in act number 5, scene number 1, there are some gravediggers who are digging the graves, and they are humorously discussing death, introducing a philosophical tone. Hamlet is reflecting on mortality while holding Yorick's skulls. So when the grave diggers, they were digging up the graves, they find a skull, and that skull belonged to Yorick. Yorick was a court jester who used to earlier work in the kingdom. So what is Hamlet doing? He's again reflecting on the mortality of human existence, that human beings are mortal in nature. They will die. No matter how big, how grandeur you are, no matter whether you are a king, whether you are a prince, whether you are a noble person, you will eventually end like this, right? You will turn into a skull, just like the skull of the Yorick. So he is holding on the skull of Yorick, and he's contemplating on the mortal nature of human beings, realizing the inevitability of death. At Ophelia's funeral, Hamlet and Latrus argue, both expressing grief. So, why were the grave diggers digging? They were digging in order to create a grave for Ophelia, because it was Ophelia's funeral, and Hamlet was there to bid farewell to Ophelia. So at Ophelia's funeral, both Latrus and Hamlet, they are having an argument. Both are expressing their grief. In scene number 2, Hamlet tells Horatio how he escaped execution by altering the letter sent to England. In scene number 2, Hamlet is telling Horatio that he has altered the letter that Claudius has sent, and in this manner he has escaped the death. He accepts fate, saying readiness is what matters. So during the duel between Latrus and Hamlet, Gertrude drinks poisoned wine and dies. So the poisoned wine that they have kept, it was uh, drunken by Gertrude. So it was Gertrude who was drinking it, and she died after it. Latrus wounds Hamlet but is also injured. So Latrus is wounding Hamlet with the poisoned sword, but he's also getting injured. Latrus confesses Claudius' plot. So while getting injured, he is confessing that Claudius has plotted all these things. He has used a poisoned sword for the killing of Hamlet. Now, finally, Hamlet kills Claudius after hearing to the confession made by Latrus. Hamlet died because he has been stricken by the poisoned sword. Gertrude is dying after drinking the poisoned wine. Latrus is also dying. So all these people have died. So the death started with Polonius. Polonius died. After that, Ophelia died. After that, Gertrude died. After that, Latrus died. Then Hamlet. Then Claudius. All of these people have died. So Hamlet dies, naming Fortinbras as king, restoring the order. So when Hamlet was about to breathe his last breath, he decides of naming Fortinbras as the king because he has seen that he is very active in his action. So he is naming Fortinbras as the king of Denmark, restoring the order. So the final act resolves the tragedy through death and justice. So final act shows the tragic consequences. There has been resolution to the tragedy, and the resolution has come through death and justice. Hamlet finally acts, but it was too late to save himself. The theme of mortality dominates. The graveyard scene is reflective of the theme of mortality of human beings. Order is restored through Fortinbras becoming the king of Denmark. Hamlet achieves a kind of philosophical acceptance, recognizing that the readiness is all. So he is actually achieving an acceptance that you have to be ready to take action. The readiness is all that matters. Overall critical insights that we are getting from the play is Hamlet is a tragic hero, and what are the tragic flaws that he is having? Overthinking, indecisiveness, and inaction. His flaw lies in overthinking and indecision, which leads to delay in action. Overthinking and the indecisions, which finally leads to the delay in actions. Then we have philosophical death. The play explores idea of existence, mortality, and human suffering. Revenge tragedy is getting transformed. Unlike typical revenge heroes, Hamlet is introspected and conflicted. So, unlike the heroes who were there in the earlier revenge tragedies, Hamlet is a different character because he is not just acting rationally, he is contemplating. He's contemplating on moral basis, he's contemplating on a psychological basis, on philosophical basis. So he's very much introspecting, he's thinking about a lot of things. He's not just taking action, and that is why he is a different character. And this is how Shakespeare is transforming the revenge tragedy by making use of a protagonist who is contemplating, who's introspecting on the nature of revenge. There is moral complexity. No character is entirely good or evil. So there is moral complexity because we cannot say that there is one such character who's completely evil and the other one is completely good. So they all the characters are having some traits of evil and good. So significance of each act is act number one is of establishment of conflict and atmosphere. Act number one is laying the foundation of the tragedy. So act number one lays the foundation of the tragedy. We get to be introduced with the murder of uh, the king of Denmark, right? So there is introducing the ghost and the idea of revenge. It establishes atmosphere of mystery, fear, moral corruption in the state of Denmark. Hamlet's emotional turmoil and disgust towards Claudius and Gertrude, they are revealing his psychological depth. The act is significant because it sets up the central question: will Hamlet take revenge, and at what cost? Act number two is development of intrigue and deception. The act deepens the complexity of the plot through spying, manipulation, and false appearances. Hamlet's feigned madness, he was pretending to be mad, begins to take shape while other character attempts to interpret his behavior. The significance lies in the development of appearance versus reality and the introduction of play within the play as a tool for uncovering the truth. So, Act 3 is the dramatic climax of the play. Hamlet confirms Claudius is guilty by making use of the mousetrap, the play within the play, yet he fails to act immediately because Claudius was praying. The accidental killing of Polonius marks a shift from thought to irreversible action, something that cannot be reversed. The killing of a person cannot be reversed. This act is significant because it intensifies the tragedy and it is propelling the narrative towards chaos and final downfall. The consequences of act number 3 unfolds in act number 4. The act is marked by madness, revenge, and political instability. Ophelia's madness and death are symbolic of emotional destruction, while Letras emerges as a contrast and foil character to Hamlet. This significance of the act lies in accelerating the moment towards tragedy and highlighting the destructive effects of revenge. Act 5 brings the tragedy to its conclusion through death, justice, and restoration. Hamlet finally acts, killing Claudius, but only at the cost of his own life. The arrival of Fortinbras is restoring the political order. The act is significant because it resolves all conflicts and reinforces the inevitability of fate and mortality. Overall, important themes are of revenge and decay. The central theme is revenge, but unlike traditional revenge heroes, Hamlet is a bit different because he's delaying action solely because he's contemplating. Appearances versus reality, the play constantly questions truth. Hamlet's madness is intentional and strategic. Ophelia's madness is genuine and tragic. Then this contrast highlights different response to suffering and loss, right? So Hamlet, when he was feigning madness, it was strategic, while Ophelia's madness was genuine. So she has actually become mad because of the suffering and loss that she has suffered, while Hamlet was strong enough to use it as a strategic move. Death and mortality. Death is ever present. The ghost introduces idea of life after death. Hamlet's soliloquies explores the idea of existence and that of mortality. So basically, the soliloquies that Hamlet is making is exploring the idea of existential crisis. Why are we living? What is the purpose? What is the meaning of life of humans? That is the idea of existential crisis. So the graveyard scene emphasizes the inevitability of death. Every human being is mortal, and eventually we will all have a same fate. We will all die. So Denmark is described as rotten, symbolizing moral corruption in relation to the crime that Claudius has committed. Political instability, because Denmark and Norway were in conflict. Social decay, action versus inaction. Hamlet struggles between thinking and acting. His intellectual nature delays the revenge, contrasted with Letras and Fortinbras, who act quickly and immediately. The play questions whether events are controlled by fate, such as ghost or destiny, or shaped by human choices. Hamlet's final acceptance suggests the balance between fate as well as free will. Loyalty and betrayal relationships are marked by betrayal. Claudius betrays his own brother for power and kingdom. Gertrude betrays Hamlet's father. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern betray Hamlet, and they started to spy on the friend. So, what is the conclusion that we get to see over here in relation to this revenge tragedy? The act of Hamlet's collectively trace a moment from uncertainty and moral conflict to tragic resolution. While the themes explore the complexities of human thought and ethical dilemma through Hamlet's journey, William Shakespeare presents a timeless exploration of revenge, truth, mortality, and the struggle between thought and action. So, Shakespeare is using Hamlet as a tool to explore themes of revenge, truth, mortality, and the struggle between thought and actions. Now, there are certain MCQs based on whatever we have discussed in the entire lecture. Who blesses the union of Ferdinand and Miranda in Act 4 of Tempest? It is Iris, Ceres, and Juno, the three goddesses. Who interrupts the mask in Act number 4? It is Prospero's remembering about the conspiracy. So, what famous ideas does Prospero express after the mask? He actually talks about life as a fleeting dream, right? Transient nature of life. We are such stuff as dreams are made up of. This was the statement that he was making. He was comparing the life of human beings to the fleeting nature of dreams. Now, what causes Ophelia's madness? It is the death of his father. Death of her father, Polonius. Now, who returns seeking revenge for Polonius' death? Laertes was returning from France in order to seek revenge for his father's murder. What happens to Ophelia? She gets drones and she dies. What does Hamlet hold in the graveyard? He was holding Yorick's skull. Yorick was the jester. And while he was holding the skull, he was contemplating on the nature of human existence. So this was it for the entire course. With that, we are done with the entire course syllabus. We are done with Midsummer Night Dream. Then we are done with King Lear. Then Tempest, and finally the Revenge Tragedy by Shakespeare. We have also completed that, and with that we are coming to the end of the course. I hope whatever we have discussed in the entire course is quite clear to you, but still, if you have any queries, you can mail me your queries at right. So I have attached my mailing ID, and you can ping me up there if you have any queries related to whatever we have discussed in these four to five lectures. So if there are any queries, I will be more than happy to resolve those queries. Okay, so thank you so much for being a part of this course, and I hope that during these lectures you must have understood the characteristics and the styling techniques that Shakespeare was using during the Elizabethan age, and you must have also understand the contrast between the comedies and the tragedies written by Shakespeare. So I hope whatever the tragedies and comedies that are discussed in the course, you are able to understand the main ideas, the main themes, and the entire gist of these tragedies and comedies via the lectures that we have had. So thank you so much, and this was it from my end for this particular course. So with that, we are coming to an end of the course, which is on Shakespeare. So with that, we have completed the entire syllabus till the final Revenge Tragedy, Hamlet. So we have completed the entire 20 units in these lectures, and if you have not seen the earlier lectures, you can just you see the recordings, because the recordings are always available for your references. And if you encounter any queries uh, while you are watching the recordings, you are free to ping me up, and I'll try to resolve your queries as soon as possible. So with that, thank you, and with that we are coming to an end. So this is my farewell, just like Shakespeare's farewell was Tempest. So this is my farewell to this particular course on Shakespeare.